Hello there, I'm Hindol Sengupta. Ambassador Prabhat Shukla has joined me to discuss many critical issues, including, of course, the issue of America. What does Donald J. Trump really want, and how will that pan out in this creation of what we now call the New World Order? Ambassador, welcome.
Thank you, Hindol. Always good to be with you. And
I'm
that's
going to
quite
throw
a
that
bill of
question.
fare laid out.
I'm going to
The
throw that
new,
question then to you, sir. Uh, you heard the speech of Donald Trump. You heard the speech of Mark Carney, both at Davos.
yes.
Talk to me a little bit first about what you thought about this new world order that Carney seems to envisage. But right afterwards, Donald Trump seems to brush aside almost like a fly.
Yeah. No, look, I think these are huge, big words. And honestly, very few people understand the even what the old world order was or is, and what is it being changed into, and who are the drivers of the change. These are huge, big subjects. But let's try and explore them while we are together. I suppose the clearest formulation we have got from the Americans, and I don't know if this amounts to a new world order, but the clearest exposition we have is this recently released national security strategy. And there are some hints of or rather blunt references to the need for change. And you see a new kind of prioritization. Uh, Top priority goes to the Western Hemisphere. And we will see, we can explore this a little more. Let me just first list them all out. And the second priority is the Indo-Pacific. And it struck me that the term Indo-Pacific is back. It had not been in use for some time since since President Trump took office. And then the third priority is Europe, then the Middle East, and then Africa. And they say very clearly that we are not going to enumerate each and every country and each and every region, because then that you lose the whole meaning of a strategy, which is a fair point, I think. And now I think I would like to begin not so much with the Western Hemisphere, though we must come to that, with Venezuela and Greenland. I have some interesting ideas on Greenland, so I'd like to bounce them off you. But I'd like to begin really with the West Asian region, which is something that touches us directly. By the way, as a general observation, I would say before we launch into this, two things come through quite clearly from this document. One is that there is only one adversary in the world, and that is China. I'm speaking for America. And the second is that India comes in for quite a number of favorable references, which sits a little askew on the actual policies that we are seeing coming out of Washington, D.C. So, we can explore that again a little further. But for now, the important thing to start with is that, people have this, I mean, it's almost the accepted verity about Donald Trump, that he is transactional and whimsical, and he can turn on a dime and change his policy whenever he wants. I don't quite see it that way. I actually see his mind, or whose mind, I don't know, but a fairly intelligent, consistent mind at work. And you see it very, very clearly. For example, now let's dive into this. The our region, West Asia, and not so much South Asia. He doesn't talk a lot about South Asia. But you know, something which should concern us. The emerging alliances slash strategic partnerships, which we are seeing. One, of course, we just saw the Pakistan Saudi Arabia defense agreement. We don't know the details. So we don't know whether nuclear deterrence has been extended. But we do know that they agree that an attack on one is an attack on both. And the implication of an attack on one country, on Pakistan, for example, would mean that they would use all the weapons at their disposal. So there is this issue that requires clarification, and then link it further west with the US effort to bring Saudi Arabia into the Abraham Accords. So you could have a situation where Saudi Arabia is a kind of bridge between Pakistan at the eastern end and Israel at the western end. And, there is a certain history to it. Firstly, back immediately after our independence, there was a detailed study done in the US about what were their interests in the South Asian region. And the Pentagon put out the most detailed study, and it said that their only real interest was in Pakistan. And the reasons they gave were twofold. One, that it would enable them to tackle the Soviet Union from the southern borders of the country. And the other is that its role in the Middle East, and especially the oil-bearing regions. These were the two reasons for which they favored Pakistan as the only country in which they had any real interest in South Asia. This idea was revived in 1971 when the British were pulling back east of Suez. And again, there was this idea floated, some in Britain, some in America, that you could have a situation of Pakistan, Iran, and perhaps Turkey coming together to stabilize the situation in the Gulf, because the Americans were embroiled in the Vietnam War. So they were unwilling to fill that vacuum. And so again and again, you see this idea coming up. And I dare say we are seeing it again right now. And this is something which should cause us some concern. And I have a feeling that we are not the only ones who are concerned about it. And I would link it, in fact, with the recent visit, unannounced and very brief visit by the president of the UAE, MBZ as he is called. Because, you have to ask yourself what brought him here. And, there has been talk of an Arab NATO. The Egyptians have mentioned it. The Turks are hanging around somewhere in the background. And remember, Turkey becomes pivotal because Turkey is also a member of NATO. So if there is a Muslim NATO and it has Turkey in it, well, then you are having a very big linkage of on a global scale. So these are the things that we need to watch out for. And I suspect that the Emiratis are also concerned about this. And the immediate provocation for high-level consultation between the president of UAE and our prime minister, my guess is it would be something to do with this board of peace, which is being set up. So that is, I think, the most important takeaway for me from not just the document, but also from the activities on the ground of the US. So this is where I would begin.
I wanted to ask you, I want to take off from the point you mentioned about this whole popularly disseminated belief, should I say, that Donald Trump is eccentric, he doesn't know
Yeah,
what he's saying, all of which I
yeah,
completely concur with you is entirely false. This is an
yeah.
act, this is a ruse, so to speak. Of course, he knows what he's doing. And indeed, the establishment behind him knows what they are doing. Now, two
Absolutely.
things I feel is perhaps, sir, if you would comment on, in a sense, does Donald Trump want that it is a secret that the UN is vitally dysfunctional, and perhaps the Americans have not cared about the UN at least for the last 20, 30 years, if not more. And there is no secret that NATO itself had very severe inadequacies and problems. Now, do you believe that, in a sense, among many other things that he wishes to do, Trump wishes to overturn and, in a sense, collapse and reinvent both NATO and the United Nations?
NATO, I'm not so sure about. Yes, he is ambivalent, no doubt. UN, I'm absolutely clear about. I think he wants to unwrap it, and this board of peace has in it the embryo of a new global organization. Because, as it began, it was meant to focus only on Gaza. But it has, if you see the charter, it obviously has a much, much wider scope. And it would place, I mean, you got to give him this, that it really has quite some reach. Because if it were to be accepted, and seems to me that quite a number of countries are accepting it already, it would make Trump a kind of super president of among all the member states. And now, just this afternoon, I have seen a report that President Putin is ready to sign on to it, and that he is, that contribution that they have to make of $1 billion. He is suggesting that the money that is lying frozen in the banks in Belgium should be used to contribute his 1 billion for the membership. Now, it does seem to me that this kind of thing would replace the UN, and it would be quite in line with the American aspiration, if you like, that it should be the number one power in the world and should remain so for the foreseeable future, which is also mentioned in the National Security Strategy document. So yes, I think on that I could be quite clear. As far as NATO is concerned, here we are now, it's going to merge with Greenland. Okay. The thing is that uh, in America, and again, this comes through very clearly in the national security document, they are very apprehensive about the future of NATO, or of Europe, correction. And they say so very explicitly, that the way their demographics are going, and you and I have agreed many times in the past, demography is destiny. And the way the European demographics are going, they are no longer certain that in a couple of decades, they will have the same commitment to the NATO Charter as those who originally founded the organization. Now, that is the fear which, in my opinion, is driving this demand for ownership of Greenland. Because it's fine, Denmark is NATO, everything is hunky dory today, and America has all the power. But 20 years from now, what happens if, their demography changes? In fact, they are quite explicit about this. So I suspect that that is what is driving it. But, I mean, I suppose he cannot be too open about the reason behind this particular demand.
Ambassador, of course, and the Europeans, in fact, are going to give him Greenland. Already, Mark Rutte has said that they would give him, in a sense, a perpetual leasehold, which, for all practical purposes, would make America the sovereign in control, as it were, of Greenland's sovereignty, so to speak. It's a minor technicality that it'll supposedly be leasehold. Both you and I perhaps know that this leasehold business is meaningless. Once America is
Yeah,
there, America is there. End of story,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And
Yeah.
what would change if America were to gain Greenland?
Good question. I think in his speech yesterday, Trump actually said that Greenland is a part of North America. So, and of course, he's questioning Denmark's right to the ownership of Greenland. I think as the northern sea routes get opened up and become more frequently used, the importance of Greenland will become even greater. By the way, I don't know if a little levity here. I don't know if you are familiar with this. When the Beatles came back from the US on their first tour, the press asked them, "So how did you find the US?" And John Lennon said, "We went up to Greenland and turned left." So it's, it's been on people's minds quite long. But
Uh,
they, I mean, they're saying it so openly that it's all to do with the Arctic region and the new activity that is becoming possible. I, I think I saw yesterday Trump did deride the notion that there are the huge mineral wealth under it, and I think I would agree with that too. It's you know there's still a lot of permafrost in Greenland, and getting to those minerals and all may not be commercially viable at this point of time, but who knows later on. And they are certainly making long range plans.
go back to the point that you were making about this so-called board of peace, so to speak. I want to ask you, if Russia genuinely signs on, and the 1 billion will come from frozen assets, will come from somewhere else, wherever it will come from. But if Russia actually signs on, it still leaves the Europeans, the Chinese, in the sort of rump of the United Nations, so to speak.
Yeah.
How will this divergence play out?
Yeah. Well, look, in the final analysis, I think it's going to turn on who is more successful, and if there is indeed a rivalry, what form it will take. Meaning, will the US walk out of the UN? I doubt that. I think they will retain their permanent membership of the Security Council, for example, and I'm pretty sure so will the Russians. And so the paralysis in the UN will continue, whereas the Board of Peace may be able to uh, function in a more cohesive, more decisive manner, depending on what kind of role President Putin plays. And he himself has said that, well, I mean, he has noted with approval, I guess, that the national security document does not treat Russia as an enemy. The only adversary it mentions, as I said earlier, is China. Otherwise, I think most of the programs are such that would not cause any discomfort to Moscow. So I'm not surprised that he is willing to sign up. And this is, by the way, quite a master stroke to say use the money that is frozen. So now America acquires an interest in unfreezing at least 1 billion out of the total amount. So
And if the Europeans are willing to give Greenland to Trump, what is $1 billion, right? I mean,
yes, yes,
Brussels
absolutely.
will jump to give that 1 billion to Trump.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. No question. If he wants it done, it'll get done. So,
I want to ask you a bit of a, in a sense, a bit of an outlier question, Ambassador, if I may. You and I have always discussed very, unique scenarios and what would pan out, and of course, knowing that it's you, these scenarios tend to pan out accurately, which is the other thing. May I ask you, the success of something like a board of peace, would it not encourage the Chinese to think in these terms too, to aggregate a bunch of countries which, in some senses, are indebted and owe
yeah.
allegiance to them, or they can basically, arm twist to create their own sort of competing grouping, even in this?
Look, not to be ruled out, but I think, as far as I can project, China is very far from being able to play that role. I have been shouting from the rooftops, America is not in decline, not in absolute, not in relative terms. And I think the last few months have given proof, if any proof were required. So you have to have that kind of clout to gather people around you. Today, I doubt if China were to do such a plan, I'm just thinking aloud, who all would sign up? Maybe North Korea, Cambodia, Laos, Pakistan, maybe today Bangladesh. And I think that exhausts the list. And it's not much of a list. So nothing stops them from doing it, but they will only expose the limits of their own influence if they were to do such a thing. I mean, frankly, Trump is running a risk. He may end up exposing the limits of his influence. So far, I think the only major country that has indicated a willingness to sign is Russia.
That's right.
And we haven't. I wish we would actually, but I don't know what decision we will take. My assessment is that when the president of the UAE came here, this was the major topic, and I think he also would have suggested that India should join, and he himself joined the very next day, as you know. So the Emiratis have signed up, and I, I think it's the Israelis who are very worried about the direction that the post-ceasefire events are taking. And, seeing the Turkish foreign minister in and the Qataris in, the Israelis don't like that. And so they would be very keen to have countries like the UAE and India and even Russia. Actually, there is a pretty bouncy relationship between Mr. Netanyahu and Mr. Putin. So I think that kind of thing would work well for Israel, and it would work well for us. So my vote, for what it's worth, would be that we should sign on too. Maybe not stump up the 1 billion right now, although frankly, with $700 billion in FX reserves, 1 billion is sort of errors and omissions column. And but still, if you want to wait and watch, that would be fine too, because for 3 years it is free. And after the third year, you have to decide whether you want to pay the money and become permanent or not. So I think we have time. And 3 years is also useful because that will be the end of Trump's term as president. Although as Board of Peace chairman, it has nothing to do with his being president. It is personal to him. So we all have to see how it evolves.
And that brings me to my next question. I mean, all the things that we've discussed in the last few minutes are about a Trumpian world, so to speak. But in 3 years, that world will come to an end. Now, there are some voices in America and some voices in Europe who worry that Trump may not go so easily, so to speak. But I'm quite skeptical about that. American
Uh,
institutions and constitutionalism is very, very strong. So one cannot see a Trump like character do something like that. And yet there could be a situation where, a sort of de facto Trump ally, wins the elections with his help, maybe JD Vance, maybe someone else, and
Yes.
from the sidelines, as the chair of the board of peace, Trump continues
Mm,
to have some influence.
mm.
How do you see this pan out?
Oh, that's very plausible. That is entirely plausible. I think for that, the one major step that we are going to see is the midterm elections in November this year. If Trump can retain the Senate and the House, Senate looks safer, but neither is entirely safe. The House is really razor thin right now. So if he loses the House, then I think all of these plans will come to naught. So apart from that, yeah, there is this. I share your skepticism about this view that he might never hold another election. Or it's not going to be possible. It's not going to work like that. It won't work there. It won't work in India. So I don't see that at all as a likely possibility. But yes, a person who is going to follow in Trump's footsteps is quite possible. Although, my judgment, I don't see such a person yet. JD Vance, is a late convert. So I don't know if he will be, true blue kind of thing, but we'll see. But there were
And the MAGA base doesn't like Vance. I mean, nowhere close to as much as it likes Trump. And
exactly,
increasingly, Jerry Vance's, in many cases, Jerry Vance's relationship with the MAGA base is souring.
yeah. Although he's trying very hard to keep it
Yeah,
going
yeah,
by courting Charlie Kirk's wife
yeah.
and joining up with her and all her functions. But yeah, but you're right. I mean, he doesn't carry the same credibility
Hmm.
that a Trump does. So it won't be easy for anyone. And I mean, look what happened after Reagan. George Bush came along, and he was really quite different. So successors aren't always quite the same as the original. But
Sorry, please go on.
no, go ahead, please.
Let's talk a little bit about this Muslim NATO ambassador, because that
Right.
is, you began by talking about West Asia, and it is indeed getting more tricky. We saw what's
Yes.
going on, for instance, in Somalia. Uh, we are seeing, the crisis between the UAE and Saudi Arabia. The friction seems to be increasing once again. That entire
Yeah.
situation, and you mentioned how post ceasefire, Israel continues to be very worried about what the situation in Gaza really is.
Yeah.
You spoke
Yeah.
about Turkish intervention. That whole situation, which seems to, I mean, there was this anticipation that, well, once this whole Gaza business is done, the Abraham Accords will be brought back to the table, many more will join, and some sort of
Mhm.
stability will return to the region. That is not how it's playing out in the way in West Asia. That's not how it's playing out in the Horn of Africa either.
Yeah. Yeah. I would add Iran to the mix,
Yes,
and
of course.
then you really have a witch's brew. Um, uh, okay, so let's begin with this concept of an Arab NATO or an Islamic NATO. Uh, this was proposed by the Egyptians about a month ago, I think, after uh, all these other agreements had been finalized. And there's been quite a lot of writing on it in the media, especially in West Asia. Uh, thing is that there are still uh, too many frictions between the main Arab countries. For example, Turkey and Egypt. One cannot abide the Muslim Brotherhood, namely Egypt, and Turkey is almost the patron today of the Muslim Brotherhood, given that Qatar is treading a little cautiously. And certainly, I can't imagine that countries like Oman would also sign up. And of course, the the glue that is pushing this Abraham Accords is Iran. It's because all of them have their concerns about the Islamic Republic. Now, if that were to change, and yeah, I mean, it came very close to toppling this time around, and I think they are now living on borrowed time. So, when and if it happens, will that make a big difference? I think it will. So, I guess people are going to tread cautiously. The idea will stay around, but whether it reaches any conclusion or in the form of a formalized treaty arrangement, I think we are still some distance away from that.
How do you see the recent tensions? I was just saying, how do you see the recent tensions between Saudi Arabia and UAE?
Yeah. No, I was coming to that. Look, I think those are getting aggravated, but I think honestly between the two countries, factors pushing for conciliation are still quite strong. So this kind of sparring and all will go on, but I don't see it reaching a breach. They will go their separate ways. So if ever there is this Arab NATO or Muslim NATO, I don't see the Emiratis going in. I don't see Oman going in. And if it's an Islamic NATO, I don't see Iran going in, obviously, at least the current Iran arrangement. You also mentioned Israel.
Mm.
Israel is not going to be very happy about such a deal. So I think they will have their say both in the region and in Washington. And therefore, I think again, that will be also a dampener. So I don't, as I said, I don't see it happening immediately. And I don't see, to answer your question about the Emiratis, I don't see that they will want a breach. I mean, they could have escalated when the Saudis attacked their proxies, but they didn't. They simply dropped the idea. So I think that is an indicator of how they would be operating. By the way, Somalia is a very important angle that you have raised. I'm glad you've raised. Not many people in India are paying attention to it. And the angle from which I'm approaching it is Somaliland. The Israeli recognition of Somaliland. It could turn out to be a real point of departure. I have been arguing for a while that we need to step up our engagement with Somaliland, not so much with Somalia as a whole. And, the Somaliland people very clearly want independence. And when and if it happens, I think it would be good for us to be on the ground and on good terms with the establishment there. Somalia itself, you must have heard how Trump rubbished them yesterday. To a diplomat like me, that sounded very wrong, but there's obviously a kernel of truth in what he's saying.
I'm going to say a little bit more about Somaliland. As you correctly said, in India, most people are not paying attention to this. Now, there is a question about India recognizing Somaliland, which some people have spoken about, though, that if India were to take that step, it would also, create other questions and issues about, places like Kashmir and so on and so forth. And it's a conversation obviously India would like to not get into and not embroil itself in.
Mm.
And that's one of the reasons, and it's waiting it out until many more people recognize Somaliland, and then of course it will do the inevitable. How do you see this argument?
I'm not convinced by it, but I'm always happy to play safe. And if there is such a fear, we should be mindful about it. So I'm in any case not saying we recognize it as an independent state, but we should strengthen our position on the ground. I don't know if we have a consulate there. If we don't, we should set one up. If we have, we should strengthen it and get a lot more active in the region. I mean, and not only for its own sake, but I mean, it's one of the most vital pieces of real estate in the world.
That's right.
Yeah. So you can't very well be out of that area. So whichever way it has to be played, and I agree, play it safe, but go in there by all means.
Something else that I noticed since we were discussing the Muslim Brotherhood that I want to put to you, there is this new article, I think from the Washington Post, that talks about unidentified US officials telling the Jamaat in Bangladesh that they are willing to do business with them. And in fact, one even suggests that they were pleased at the way, or at least pleasantly surprised at the way the Hasina trial panned out and the way that it was quote unquote organized rather than being sort of, chaotic, so to speak. Now, this sounds very fishy and very odd to me. And I wonder what you think. I mean, so much has been spoken here, and I have also spoken about what the Americans really want in Bangladesh. And, I remember talking about it ever since the articles began. I mean, one sure sign that the Americans want something out of a country is that when New York Times and Washington Post and others start bashing that country, and the economists start bashing that country incessantly, week after week, week after week, right? So, how do you read this? What do the Americans hope to gain by, in a sense, cutting a deal with the Jamaat?
Yeah, it's surprising, isn't it? On the surface, it goes against everything that they stand for and propagate. And above all, I have not been able to understand what is their grievance against India and against Prime Minister Modi in particular. So and it isn't just a matter of, inadequate communication, because firstly, there has been communication, and also because, it seems to move on from administration to administration. So no matter who is the president, and honestly speaking, what we are seeing under Trump has come to me as a surprise. I would have thought that the spirit of February would permeate pretty much all decision making, but it is not. And I am wondering if even if we were to get a trade agreement done, and I mean, kudos to our people, they've really held their nerve and they are going about it very systematically. But somehow it hasn't yet been clinched. So I hope it does happen. But, you know, I, s- I suspect that there's probably something to do with our, among other things, okay? It's not just one factor, but I think the defense side, the defense cooperation is an important one. In my reading of the US archives, they at some of the most critical junctures when they have to take a decision on a big issue, the voice of the Department of Defense is among the loudest. And I think somehow we have not been able to break the ice in our defense cooperation. We've had a lot of agreements on paper and a lot of things have been done, but somehow it hasn't really got off the ground. I not very clear what the reason is, but like you take for example this jet engine sale
Oh,
and
gee. Yes.
and technology.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's been signed and signed and signed again and again. Every time now, this is the real thing. Now it's going to come through, and it never does. So finally, we've gone with the French, which I think is a good option. And I've always maintained that the French are among our better strategic
Uh,
partners. So, of course, this one has not yet been approved at the top level, but I guess it should happen. But when I was in Moscow, the company that makes the jet engines for the MiG aircraft, and they've been doing it for about 100 years, and they're making some of the finest jet engines. They had offered the same thing to us that Safran is going to do with us. But somehow we didn't bite. I think we were that time looking to America for the latest in technology or what, but somehow it didn't happen. Anyway, we have to move forward. I think um, it is important for us to engage the Americans and put the cards on the table and ask and try and understand what it is that is driving their coolness, if not outright negativity, towards India.
Can I ask you, Ambassador, is the American deep state playing some long game of containment with India? I mean, I derived this from my old conversations with you about various people in various parts of the world telling me that, well, who wants another country of a billion people to rise to a particular level and so on and so forth. Now, this sounds a bit simplistic, but as we have often seen, some of the most simple reasons turn out to be true.
Is
This
a
is the long arc, long containment arc game that is being played.
Yeah, I also think so. I don't know how important this is as a factor. Uh, could it be, for example, if we opened up our trade markets, if we went in for some major defense purchases, would it change? We'll never know till we try it, and I don't know if we should try it. But I, I, I think right now we are still very, very far from becoming even a source of concern for America. And while they have the Chinese snapping at their heels, you would think they'd need a country like India. Of course, Mr. Trump is talking about a G2, so maybe they don't see the need for an India. But then that again argues against this notion that they don't want another country of a billion people rising and posing a danger or an imagined danger. Because, I think the critical factor is democracy. I think as long as India is a democracy, given our cultural identity, our religious identity, I don't see that we could ever do the kind of things that China or Nazi Germany ever did. So I would argue that these fears, they seem to exist, but I guess they are misplaced.
My last question: what do you see how do you see the process between India and America unfold? By when will we get the deal, and what will happen in a post-Trump?
That's how soon we'll get a deal. I don't know, because from I have no inside knowledge. What I've been reading in the media is that on at least one occasion, a deal was done and it was nixed by the president himself. So I don't know what is motivating him, but as long as he has this uh, fascination with his favorite field marshal, I think it's possible that he is not looking seriously to come to terms with India. How long all this will take, I don't know, but we can be pretty sure that before very long they will understand that India is a far better short-term, medium-term, long-term bet than pretty much any other country in Asia. Meanwhile, I think we really need to focus on countries like Japan in Asia. And, it is a country that has almost everything that we need in terms of technology. And of course, they are today really in the driving seat on this CPTPP. I believe we should be seeking to join the TPP. I think, again, we have discussed this earlier. Instead of running after RCEP and all that, we'd be much better off seeking to work with the TPP.
Talk a little bit about Japan. I'm glad you brought it up. Japan also has a major demographic problem. There are other issues cropping up in Japan. One
Yes.
would think India should be doing much more with Japan,
Yeah.
but we don't even have very significant inflow of Indians into Japan. I wonder why.
I think, based on my experience, uh, Indians traveling abroad are happiest dealing with the English language, and for all self-evident reasons. And so, it hasn't worked very well in Germany. I mean, the Russians have been talking about it. They've been talking about it since my time there, which is a good 15 years ago. Uh, and so, therefore, I don't know if there will be a great deal of interest on the Indian side. And for the rest, I think, honestly, uh, it is something that India and Japan can and should work on. And as I said, their technology is not, I mean, we normally think of electronics and stuff like that, which, by the way,
That's right.
we do very badly need, and we should be collaborating with them. And I think this gift city is an area where we can really set up a special zone which will cater to foreign investors like the Japanese. But they're also pretty good at defense technology, and of course, space technology. So, and space is
So,
something that,
if Japan genuinely begins to remilitarize in any significant way, it will immediately be a point of great leverage for us.
yes, exactly so. And you are hearing the early stirrings of exactly this kind of thinking. In fact, recently, some very senior official talked about nuclear weapons.
That's right. That's right. Exactly.
Yeah. And then, of course, it was promptly denied, which is how the game is played. So, perhaps a bit of kite flying, testing the waters. But, really, if North Korea can have nuclear weapons, uh, why shouldn't South Korea and Japan? So, and again, honestly, there is absolutely no conflict of interest between us and the Japanese.
On that very optimistic note, Ambassador, we leave it at there. At that, thank you very much for your time. Prabhat Shukla, as always, a delight. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Hindol. Always a pleasure talking to you.